Hello and welcome to another Naughty Egg Draw. I'm Jake, and today is finally video 4 of 4 on how to make an animation from start to finish. Now, if you're just hopping in right now and you haven't watched any of those videos, make sure you go and watch those. I'll have a link up above here or down below. So today's video is going to be on how to paint and color your animation. Now, this process is pretty simple, but it can take quite a bit of time. So I'll be giving you guys some tips on how to use Animate CC and Flash. Things that I didn't know how to do when I first started and can really expedite your guys' process when you guys get started. Now, we probably should get into it because this process can take a lot of time and I have a lot ahead of me. So, let's get into it. So when it comes to coloring your animation, there isn't a lot to really talk about. Essentially, you'll be picking your colors and then you can just go crazy. The biggest thing to keep in mind when you start is what colors you want for the base of your characters or objects, and what colors you'll use for your shadows or highlights. So when you start to color, you have to pay attention to where you want your light source to be coming from, if you're planning on using different shades of color to identify your shadows and highlights. This being said, you don't always have to shade your characters. You can definitely get away with not making your characters have shaded sections. Just take a look at something like Rick and Morty. They don't shade their characters at all, but it works. But they do counteract this by making sure their backgrounds are more detailed with different shades of color. So the decision of making this effect is up to you, and it can be really determined based on the style of animation you're making. With this animation, I really wanted it to look like the classic Sonic we all know and love, so I did choose to add shadows. Thankfully for me, I didn't have to figure out what colors these characters were. All I had to do was drop an image of the actual characters, and then just pull my palette from there. Now, doing the coloring process is one of my favorite parts about making an animation, because this is the best part where you can just sit down, zone out, listen to some music, some audiobooks, vlogs, whatever your fancy. Because for the most part, this section is one of the easiest parts if you understand how lighting works. You're not focusing on poses or really intricate motions, it's just adding color. Now, I used to hate doing the coloring process when I first started making animations. That's because I would make it much harder on myself because I didn't know how to use Animate. Well, when I first started, it was called Flash. But either way, I didn't know the settings that you could use in Animate to really help you with the coloring process. One of the biggest tips I can give you when you're doing the coloring is going to be in the options of your brush settings. If you go here and choose the option of Paint Behind, you will be able to do exactly what the name suggests. With this option, you are able to paint across the lines and the filled in spaces without making those marks cross over. It'll just make them appear behind the other lines. Now, another big tip I can give you when you're doing this coloring process is to go through and focus on just one color at a time in the section and working all the way through the scene. This will help you keep your shadows and highlights staying consistent throughout the animation. As you can see with Sonic, I'm going through and completing all the shadow sections, and then I am going back afterwards and adding the base color to the rest of what's left over. I like to pick the shadows as my first focus because I find it easier to judge the shadows of an object over anything else. But that's just kind of how my brain works. For you, maybe focusing on the base or the highlights may be better. Just try to avoid coloring each frame completely and then moving on to the next, because this can result in a very sloppy set of shadows or highlights, as well as just costing you more time in the end. So when you're animating frame by frame animation, you have to color every single frame, but if you notice, when I was painting the first head of Sonic, I did paint everything completely, but that's because in the first one, it was a symbol. When you paint inside a symbol, that color will actually carry on through the entire animation on the main timeline, wherever it shows up. This can be a very effective way to animate because you don't have to go in and do every single frame. So for a simple animation, you can get the animations done and out much faster if you animate everything in a symbol. As I talked about in my last video, I should have done Tails as his own symbol and then animated him in the main timeline. Because as you saw when I did the lip syncing, I ran into some extra problems with him, and I ran into those problems again when I was doing the coloring process. Now, it probably would have been easier if I would have just redrawn him in his own symbol, but I didn't because apparently I like making things harder on myself. Alright, so just sit back and watch this master do his thing. Okay, I'm not really a master, but yeah, just sit back and enjoy. Now I did lose the footage of me finishing the animation of Tails, so I do apologize for that. I'm going to go through and reinforce some of the tips that I gave you throughout this video. The first is to make sure you use the paint behind option in your brush, and the other is that you want to focus on one section of color at a time and not to paint the entire thing to completion each frame. But anyways, that is the end of the coloring process. Thank you so much for watching this video until the end, and make sure that you leave a comment below suggesting things for future videos. And like always, keep drawing, and until next time. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to click on that sub button over here on the left or down below. If you want to enjoy some other videos of mine, make sure you click on them over here on the right. Also, make sure you throw a comment and a thumbs up down below, and like always, keep drawing, and until next time.